Have you ever considered how money relates to speech? The federal government has. One of the issues with federal election laws is a limitation on the use of money for a candidate to get their message out. Now, what does the case of FEC versus Cruz have to do with free speech? More important, what does it show about the state of elections in America? We'll discuss that next on the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Hello there, everyday Americans. Welcome to the Constitution Study. This is where we read and study the Constitution. We teach rising generation to be free. Glad you could join me. If you want to find out more about the Constitution Study, just go to the website, constitutionstudy.com. You can find the text of this article. You can find other articles, videos, podcasts, my radio program, all the programs that we're working on, including my Blessings of Liberty tour, which I'll talk about a bit more at the end of the video, along with a giveaway I'm working on for this Independence Day. But before we get there, let's talk about this case of FEC versus Cruz. During his 2018 re-election campaign, in compliance with federal law, Senator Ted Cruz loaned his campaign $260,000. To repay this loan, along with other campaign debts, federal laws allow campaigns to receive contributions after Election Day. According to Section 304 of the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, or the BCRA, the amount of loans that a candidate can be repaid from the campaign is $250,000. The Federal Election Commission, the FEC, has promulgated regulations that allow the repayment of loans above $250,000, as long as the repayment happens within 20 days of the election. The campaign committee began repaying Mr. Cruz's loans after the 20-day post-election window. It therefore repaid the maximum allowed by FEC regulations of $250,000. Mr. Cruz and the campaign committee filed suit in federal district court, alleging that this law violates the First Amendment. The district court granted Mr. Cruz and the campaign committee's request for a summary judgment on their constitutional claims. The district court held that the loan repayment limitations burdens political speech without sufficient justification. The district court also ordered that the challenges to the regulation to be dismissed as moot. The federal government appealed this decision to the Supreme Court. From the case FEC versus Cruz, we read, Section 304 of the BCRA burdens core political speech without proper justification. The court found that the loan repayment section of the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act burdens speech without proper justification. Let's dig into that a little further. The loan repayment limitation abridges First Amendment rights by burdening candidates who wish to make expenditures on behalf of their own candidacy through personal loans. Restricting the sources of funds that campaigns may use to repay candidate loans increases the risk that such loans will not be repaid in full, which, in turn, deters candidates from loaning money to their campaigns. This burden is no small matter. Debt is a ubiquitous tool for financing electoral campaigns, especially for new candidates and challengers. By inhibiting a candidate from using this critical source of campaign funding, Section 304 raises a barrier to entry, thus abridging political speech. In other words, the ability to use money in a campaign is a form of speech. I do see an indirect correlation since campaign funds are used to fund speaking engagements. But does that directly link spending to speech? After all, isn't it more accurate to say that limiting the ability to spend money abridges the freedom of the press, which is defined as the art or business of printing and publishing? It's not so much that money allows you to speak, but it allows you to publish your ideas. As Webster's 1828 dictionary defines it, publish is to discover or make known to mankind or to people in general what before was private or unknown, to divulge as a private transaction, to promulgate or proclaim as a law or edict. By the court's logic, all communication is considered speech. So any law that directly or indirectly deters communication is an abridgment of speech. However, the court has long held that government can abridge speech as long as it's for a good enough reason. From the FEC versus Cruz opinion, we read, the government has not demonstrated that the loan repayment limitation furthers a permissible goal, Any law that burdens First Amendment freedoms, even slightly, must be justified by a permissible interest. In other words, it's not that Congress cannot pass a law that abridges speech, but that it must be for a goal the court finds permissible. What are those permissible grounds? The only permissible ground for restricting political speech recognized by this court is the prevention of quid pro quo corruption or its appearance. In this case, the government argues that repaying the candidate's loan raises a heightened risk of corruption. I, like the court, don't see how that could be so. First of all, the candidate is not simply asking for money from the campaign, but the repayment of a loan. If you lent someone money, but the government prevented them from paying you the full amount simply because they had passed some arbitrary due date, you wouldn't find that very just, would you? Secondly, while the campaign can continue to collect contributions, which are used for, among other things, paying back loans to the campaign, those contributions are capped at $2,900 per election. That means the loan repayment limitation of Section 304 is just another layer of regulation, and therefore not necessary. Now, in an effort to keep this law in place, the government provided an additional argument. As a fallback argument, the government analogized post-election contributions used to repay a candidate's loan to gifts because they enrich the candidate as opposed to the campaign's treasury. This analogy is meaningful only if the baseline is that the campaign will default. I love this one. Paying back a loan is suddenly a gift. I think I'll remember that the next time I borrow money from a bank. Now, Congress basically is demanding that campaigns default on certain loans because they're afraid it might look bad. While the court focused on the impact of the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act on campaign speech, I want to look at the constitutionality of the act itself. Does Congress have the legal authority to regulate campaign finances for the election of U.S. senators? Well, according to Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution, the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. But the Congress may, at any time by law, make or alter such regulations except as to the places of choosing senators. The legislature of each state is supposed to set the time, places, and manner of elections for senators and representatives. But Congress may change the rules. Well, for everything but the place of choosing senators. That is prescribed by the Constitution. Now, Mr. Cruz was a U.S. senator running for re-election. Obviously, campaign finance laws do not involve the times or places of holding elections. But does the method of financing a campaign fall under the manner of holding an election? Again, Noah Webster defines manner in his 1828 dictionary as form, method, way of performing or executing. While I can see how financing could be part of how we execute elections, I think it's pushing what the framers of the Constitution meant. The idea that the power to determine the times, places, and manner of choosing senators and representatives would reside in Congress certainly was a concern during the ratification debates. From the debates in Virginia, what can be more defective than the clause concerning the elections? The control given to Congress over the time, place, and manner of holding elections will totally destroy the end of suffrage. Mr. Wythe of Virginia went so far as to suggest the following amendment be included in the Bill of Rights: that Congress shall not alter, modify, or interfere in the times, places, or manner of holding elections for senators and representatives, or either of them, except when the legislature of any state shall neglect, refuse, or be disabled by invasion or rebellion to prescribe the same. So then, why do we still have this language in the Constitution? Well, James Madison explained on the floor of the Federal Convention. The necessity of a general government supposed that the state legislatures will sometimes fade or refuse to consult the common interest at the expense of their local conveniences or prejudices. The policy of referring the appointment of the House of Representatives to the people and not to the legislatures of the states supposes that the result will be somewhat influenced by the mode. This view of the question seems to decide that the legislatures of the state ought not to have the uncontrolled right of regulating the times, places, and manners of holding elections. These were words of great latitude. It was impossible to foresee all the abuses that might be made of the discretionary power, whether the elector should vote by ballot or by voice, should assemble at this place or that place, should be divided into districts or meet all at one place, should all vote for all the representatives, or all in a district vote for a number allotted to the district. These and many other points would depend on the legislatures and might materially affect the appointments. Whenever the state legislatures had a favorite measure to carry, they would take care to so mold the regulations as to favor the candidate they wished to succeed. Now, while there were concerns about Congress setting the manner of electing representatives, there was also concern that those chosen to represent the people would be manipulated by the state legislatures based on their power to regulate how they are elected. I guess the framers planned on Congress keeping its meddling with the state elections to a minimum. Now, should the funding of political campaigns be regulated? I'm not 100% sure about that. On the one hand, the ability to purchase media coverage to get one's message out is important, but unlimited funding could also be used to corrupt an election. I suppose if the American people weren't so easily swayed by the blatant bribery of our current campaign strategies, then how they were financed wouldn't be such a problem. On the other hand, placing the controls on campaign financing in the hands of those who are elected by those campaigns isn't much better either. After all, history has shown that those in Congress will tend to use such laws to the advantage of the incumbents or those within their political party whenever possible. Did the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002 burden the free speech of candidates? I'm not sure I would say it burdened free speech, but it certainly did place a burden on their freedom of press. It therefore violated the First Amendment. So while I disagree with the court on the question of freedom of speech, I do agree that the BCRA violates the First Amendment. I think this case brings up some interesting questions about financing elections. Let's face it, things have changed since the 18th century. As more and more people have become professional politicians, the need to regulate how they campaign has grown. As power has accumulated in our political class, the corruption of the election process was sure to follow. And as the money has flowed into political campaigns, the temptation to use donations to purchase influence has gone up along with it. It appears John Adams was correct. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Once again, we see money in politics becoming a political football. Now, I'm not saying I've got a good answer one way or the other. In today's society, where districts cover such vast territory, especially we see especially for the Senate, but even in the House, you need to communicate. You need to get your message out. And the most efficient way is with airtime or print media. And that costs money. But on the other hand, we've seen how money has been used to dwarf an opponent, to prevent an opponent from getting their message out. So what do? And are members of Congress really the best people to decide how to fund campaigns for members of Congress? As I said, I don't have a really good answer here, but hopefully it's brought up some questions in your mind. At least we know that the 20-day deadline for repaying loans greater than $250,000 to candidates has been found unconstitutional. What about the rest of campaign finance? And how do you use your funds when it comes to campaigns? Remember, when we declared independence, those signers pledged to each other their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. We should also consider, how do we use our fortunes, not just for political campaigns, but everywhere? Now, if you like these types of discussions, I have a new tour coming out. It's called the Blessings of Liberty Tour. I'm still confirming dates. You can find out more at constitutionstudy.com/tour. Find out more about the tour, check the dates. Hey, invite me to come speak to you or your group. I won't charge you to show up. If you can help cover my travel costs, that'd be wonderful, but I don't charge you unless you're selling tickets. We can find out more about the blessings of liberty and how we can live with them today. Now, you can also support the Blessings of Liberty Tour. It costs money for me to travel the country, to drive around with material that people can learn from. And if you want to support that, well, you can do that on that page as well. And if you found this episode interesting, intriguing, worth your time, well, please share it with friends and family. Better yet, go online, go to your social media, and get a group together to come join us here next time for the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to